you all for being here for the fourth panel discussion presented by RBSoft on overcoming barriers to AI adoption in education. I'm Kay Banks, and I'm the moderator for this panel discussion. My background is in education, and I'm an instructional designer, but we have some other very talented panelists here, and I would love to introduce them, but I'm going to give them a chance to introduce themselves. So, Cedric, would you like to go ahead and start us off? Tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from, and what you do now. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes, so I'm Cedric Scott Jr. I am actually a career changer. Originally, I started out in chemistry. So I got my bachelor's degree in chemistry, became a chemist briefly, and then pivoted into education where I began teaching, working primarily in elementary schools. So I kind of work my way up through the ranks in the public school sector, from teaching to doing a lot of math and more so like STEM-based kind of intervention and enrichment, some different coordination there, instructional coaching. In my last school-based role, I was actually the assistant principal and math instructional coach at an elementary school in Washington, D.C. Since then, back in 2020, I made another pivot into the ed tech space. So I've done some different work there related to curriculum, product, and now doing a lot of things focusing in kind of the professional learning space. And I'm also the founder of EduHustle, which is a movement for educators, which the primary mission is guiding educators to maximizing their time, talent, and earning potential.
Wonderful. Thank you, Cedric. So excited to have you here with us today. Wilmari, let's go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi guys, thank you so much. So my history is based on, I started as a graphic designer working for educational publishing company, and that's where I was introduced into education systems, the pedagogies, learning methods, how to display information that enhances learning for the user, students and educators, and then moved into instructional design and the e-learning spectrum about 7-8 years ago, where we focused more on corporate learning, but again engaging users in a digital platform. And then the last 2 years also been working with virtual reality and augmented reality and teaching users, students, how to overcome barriers, simulations, those hard to teach kind of simulations, especially working with the mining industry and safety aspects that you can't do in a normal classroom. So that's a short intro into my history.
Yeah, wonderful. Great to have you tonight. Thank you. Tim, go ahead.
Yes, hi, my name is Tim Mousel. I've been teaching college for 30 years in the kinesiology department. So you may be wondering, why is a kinesiology professor talking about AI? Well, I did take one computer class in my life and I did get an F. So you're probably wondering why even more so. So back in the late 90s, I've owned a martial arts gym since the 80s. But when the internet came out, I wanted to build a website for my business. So I taught myself how to build websites. Then I wanted to add some automation. So I taught myself how to do programming. And since the late 90s, I've been programming. I started a programming business on the side. So since actually before ChatGPT came out November 30th, back in October, I came across the OpenAI API. And when I discovered that, my mind was blown. I immediately saw that this is going to change not just education, but it's going to change the world. So I created 2 educational programs utilizing AI, helps educators and students. Since then, I've been just fully immersed in AI daily, just soaking as much as I can. And in the last 2 weeks, I've been fortunate enough to be keynote speaker at 3 different colleges for their convocation. And I've just been really hitting it full steam ahead.
That's amazing. And congratulations on the keynote speaker. And that's pretty impressive. So
thank you. I feel very honored.
Yeah, we're delighted to have you through here. Huge talented individuals in your own space and in your own regard. So looking forward to hear your opinions on the questions that we have. And mentioning the questions, we have tons of questions and they're open to all of you, but some will be targeted. And so when they are targeted, I'll definitely call that out and make sure that you're aware. This one's specifically for you. But we want to open it up for questions, and then I'll leave time for you guys to give, a little snippet about your overall take on AI at the end. But let's start it off. Let's jump into the questions. This one is, again, for everyone. What role do you think AI can play in personalized learning experiences? We'll start it off. Who would like to start that one off?
I can go ahead and start. So the question was, what role will it play in personal lives?
Yes, and personalized learning experiences. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, personalization is a huge thing. In fact, one of the platforms I built enables the teacher to go to the teacher side of the software and they input their grading rubric and they enter the assignment. Then on the student side of the platform, they enter their paper, like their essay. And what it does is it looks at the assignment and the rubric, compares it to the student writing, and then gives them instant feedback. So we'll say, for example, your assignment specifies that you say 3 things. You said only 2. So expand on this idea. So what happens is the student can go back and rewrite their paper with that personalized tutoring. And I've used that system in my classes for the last 2 semesters. And the quality of the papers I've been receiving has been noticeably increased. And then something that I'm really mind blown by and really happy about is my sister is a 4th grade teacher. She used this platform with one of her students. So in the classroom, she has computers all around. They write their papers. She goes around, gives feedback to each student, but they have to sit there and wait for the feedback. She had one of the students using my platform. He got the feedback right away, and she sent me a text message, which was just amazing. She said, my student comes in every day beaming with excitement because he wants to write a paper. And I thought, wow, how powerful is it that a 4th grader wants to write a paper and they're excited about it? Because that instant feedback had such an impact on him that he loved it. He didn't have to sit there and wait for the teacher to come around. So personalization, I think, is going to change the world of education. That's a huge one.
So thank you, Tim. Okay. Anyone else, or I can move to the next question.
Yeah, I can just maybe also, a lot of issues that we're covering or, experiencing is users with disabilities, learning disabilities, hearing disabilities, pardon me, reading disabilities. And that is all elements that can be, approached through AI and adjusted through AI. We've got text to speech, we've got speech to text that helps users to listen to and to read voiceover on their learning, which gives a lot more personal feel to it, especially when you start listening to what you're seeing, engaging in the auditory in that as well. So I think, using AI to get users more excited about it, that it's not just a one-dimensional learning platform, but that it becomes a 3-dimensional platform where you engage a lot more senses, listening, talking, interacting through typing, reading. That is a crucial key into personalizing the user experience and the learner experience when working through that content. So just from a disability point of view, also personalizing it so that it's not just something, that students who run through mainstream schools, but also students with disabilities. It's something they can access and it enhances their learning experience as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Wilmari. You mentioned some for disabilities and students having a well-rounded education. Obviously, this panel is talking about the barriers to education using AI. So my next question is, what are some of the financial implications of AI adoption in education, and how can they be mitigated? Because as we know, education can run the gambit to private schools all the way to public schools. And so what are the financial implications there?
I think it's going to depend on the approach the schools take. and there's many approaches. There's approaches that don't cost anything. All students can have access to free ChatGPT. And when I say all students, I mean all students of age that meet the terms of service agreement with OpenAI. But, you know, they can go to Bing that has ChatGPT version 3.5 and 4.0 built into the Bing chat feature. There's multiple very good platforms, you know, just besides ChatGPT, there's Claude 2. These all have free versions that students, teachers, anybody can use for free. So I don't see cost as being prohibitive. Maybe when you start talking about if schools want to create their own fine-tuned model, now it's going to be a small expense, but it's not going to be a big expense for those type of approaches.
I can chime in there also. I think, honestly, just thinking about the pandemic and what we saw there related to access to technology, for example, for a lot of students, especially, you know, a lot of students that I taught and worked with at the time, because I was still working in schools. And I think it's not necessarily a barrier regarding the cost with AI technology. I think it's, you know, cost barriers related to just accessing technology in general, right? Like if you live in a certain area, then, I mean, is the technology itself going to be even accessible for you to even get to, you know, logging into a chat GPT or, you know, whatever platform. So you actually have to have, you know, a device to begin with. And I think that there were some strides made from, you know, some of the, you know, colleagues that I have and folks in different states, you know, and I'm based in the US, so I can't necessarily speak internationally, but I think that there were some implications because of the pandemic and because everybody basically had to be, you know, in place, right? We couldn't go anywhere. You couldn't be in a classroom physically. So you had to have access. And I think that there were, you know, some, you know, kind of strides taken in that vein to make sure that, you know, we actually worked on that. I think that there could have been, you know, a better effort done prior to, and rather than having to kind of scramble on the back end. But I think that, you know, in a lot of situations, we learned our lesson there. But then the other thing too, one thing that I read, and I believe it was maybe back in 27, I think it was created initially in 2017, or this is the first revamp since that year, is the National EdTech Plan here in the U.S. Just in kind of toward the end of the COVID pandemic. I think back in maybe just last year in 2022 was the first time that plan was actually being revisited and revised and looked at for the purpose of ensuring that within classrooms, K-12, and I think that, I'm not sure if higher ed was lumped in there, but I would think so, that there was going to be a greater effort focusing on access to technology within classrooms, which then, of course, would open the doors to bringing in AI so that students would have access to that too, looking into the future, because honestly, you know, this isn't going anywhere. It's only going to continue to grow and expand, but I'll stop there for now.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. You actually brought up another point with the digital divide. Do you think AI technology can help in addressing that digital divide? And if so, how? Or if not, you know, it just won't. But what do you guys think?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think so. You know, I live in South Africa and we have a lot of rural areas that a lot of the times they don't even have electricity in the schools, you know, so it's not just a thing of, do we have the technology? Do we have access? Those kids don't have electricity, you know, so they can't even introduce computers to that. But what we found over here is most of these people, do they have smartphones? There's very few people that have access to smartphones and the technology of smartphones. So I think, you know, using that type of technology, thinking about how we present information, how we interact with information, how we present our teaching materials, smartphones are available. They are open areas. We have communities that have free Wi-Fi. A lot of the shopping centers that people can access have free Wi-Fi. So even though it's not always readily accessible at home, there are public areas that they do help people to access that. So I think in that way, coming from our background, background and where our people are at. That is one way where I'm so excited about technology addressing that digital divide and helping those students who would not normally necessarily have access to AI and the digital content and digital world.
Awesome. Thank you, Wilmari. This next question is for you, Tim, actually. With your history and your background, do you, well, I guess, how can AI support teachers, not only in their direct feedback, like you mentioned before, but in their curriculum development and their lesson planning? How can AI be a benefit in that area?
It's a huge, tremendous help. And what and actually, I went on a ChatGPT for educators or for teachers on Facebook group yesterday. And I put a post, I said, give me the subject and the grade level, and I will give you a lesson plan. No, I will give you an assignment that enables the student to use ChatGPT while still developing critical thinking skills. And so immediately I had about 40 people just instantly respond with that information. So I gave them a lesson plan for each of those. And that's something that I added to one of my platforms, where if I just give it the grade level and subject, it will give a very nice assignment. And this one was enabling the student to use ChatGPT and to become familiar with it, which is extremely important for future job markets. But for all these different subjects, it came up with fantastic assignments that I personally could have never thought of. And you can also come up with assignments that would make it extremely difficult to use AI with. So you can take either approach, whatever approach you believe in the most. It can help you generate assignments, lesson plans, worksheets, rubrics, anything to a really high level. That's, again, it's things I couldn't think of myself. And I think most people would have trouble coming up with some of the things it does as well, because it's so creative in its output. Depending on the prompt you give it, of course. You know, that's the really important thing. A lot of people say, ChatGPT is so stupid, it wouldn't do this. It's like, oh yeah, well, maybe if you say it a little bit differently, you'll get what you want from it. But yeah, I think it's a game changer to help educators prepare for their classes, no doubt.
Very cool. Now, in that same light, as a barrier, are there any subjects or educational categories that it would be difficult to adopt AI? And that's open for anyone. Yeah.
In the beginning, math was really difficult, and to a degree still, because it can't do math just out of the box. However, for ChatGPT Plus users, there's plugins such as the Wolfram plugin, which now you ask it a math question with that plugin and it's going to give you the right answer. In fact, I had a big debate with a math professor at my college. She said, it can't do math. I said, oh, give me a problem. And so she gave me a math problem. I put it in there with the Wolfram plugin enabled. It explained step by step the process. It gave the answer and her eyes got this big. And she's like, wow, I had no idea. And so we'll do math now, even though initially it would not do any math. So that can still be a stumbling block. Some engineering, it still can give you some issues coming up with engineering solutions. But the majority of disciplines, it does a fantastic job with, in my experience.
And yeah, I would add that considering barriers, especially, being somebody who worked in science and in the actual physical laboratory, I think that there are, of course, the implications there to think about the practicality of things, where, of course, me going into a chemistry lecture course, I can listen to what the professor says, I can take the notes, and, have all of the theoretical pieces and components, but you have to question, I guess, is there truly a depth of knowledge unless I physically go into the laboratory and replicate what was actually said in that classroom, in that lecture hall? So I think for that component of it, which I guess may even lend into talking about careers. I'm not sure if we're going to go down that realm and that kind of pathway today, but just thinking about, is my job going to be replaced by ChatGPT? What will still be around and possible with, you know, AI stepping into kind of the workspace, if you will? And I think, you know, for me looking at it, I just don't necessarily see that that's going to be the thing that is we're going to start seeing more so, just related to like the practicality of a lot of the more technical things. I mean, I've heard of you know, an AI like, you know, bot or an arm or something like that doing some type of surgery, some type of like minor surgery or something like that. But to what extent, you know what I mean, outside of having an actual human doctor in that space, the human scientist, the human engineer, to really step in, do the critical thinking and problem solve, and maybe use the AI tools and technologies to kind of further that. But will that actually prevent or create some type of barrier between where we are right now is kind of the question. And I don't necessarily think that that will be the case.
Yeah,
I
no,
don't know
that
if I
is
can
definitely.
jump in there. Sorry, Kay.
Yeah, go ahead. Go for it.
Yeah, so I understand, you know, where Cedric is coming from with the science labs, but I don't think we should sell AI short in that department. I've been working, or our company works with mining industries, as mentioned, and we build very lifelike simulations, teaching the guys about safety within those environments, which in itself already, if you go in, there's a dangerous space. So you don't necessarily want to teach somebody to drive where there are live people walking. So, you know, using AI and the technology, building simulations where people sit in motion, cages, learning how to drive those big haul trucks, learning the consequences of not, you know, focusing on the job they're doing, you know, forcing mistakes on the simulation environment so that they can learn from those mistakes and not necessarily achieve a perfect score during their training. And I think, you know, we are moving there. There are some limitations, but it's going to be moving very fast until we are at that point where we will be able to do those live experiments. But I don't think we should sell the human interaction short in education, especially in early childhood education, your lower grade education. You know, people still want that human connection. And we saw that with the pandemic during COVID. We had the classrooms and the digital interaction, but people still crave that human touch, human interaction, even though AI is making incredible strides in developing, you know, a space where difficult subjects can be explored.
There's been a lot of concern that I've seen from faculty of being replaced by AI. And personally, for the reasons that you mentioned, I don't see that happening. I think there's always going to be the need for a teacher and the human element that AI cannot replace.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you all. AI is definitely an amazing advancement in technology, but it's definitely still a tool to be used for the educational experience. So I definitely agree with all of that you have said. My next question is open to all of you. With what considerations should be utilized when selecting an AI platform like a ChatGPT for an educational experience? What do you need to consider?
I think, as we already discussed, cost, privacy for sure. And with the privacy concern, at least with the open AI platform, you have the settings that you can turn off sharing of data to where it doesn't use your data to train and it doesn't save your data. It saves it for 30 days just for legal issues, and then it's deleted. But there's a lot of platforms popping up using the API. And I think that's where the true danger comes in, potentially, because unless you look at their privacy policy, are they saving the data? Are they following FERPA policies? Those are all considerations, but the big platforms, they do follow those type of things, but it is still a consideration.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the, I guess, big ones that kind of jumps out, especially as you go into high school, even, you know, maybe even middle school at this point, higher ed, is, you know, thinking about plagiarism. I've heard that that's definitely been like a solid, you know, a conversation that's been being had for some time now. Of course, with, you know, being able to prompt, a ChatGPT or some other generative platform to produce, something that could potentially come across as if a human wrote it. So, there are, I think, considerations that have to be taken in that regard. And then I also just kind of consider things, definitely from the data perspective, because one of the things, of course, that, is more so, I think, beginning to become more prevalent in elementary schools, primary schools, depending on where you are, is thinking about, the safety concerns, how are you being safe online, digitally, things like that. And of course, the idea of data has to come into it, which I know, Tim mentioned, but it's always the conversation and the wondering of when we're talking about technology, for example, we use the term user. And I've watched a great documentary recently on Netflix, and it just kind of talked to the psychology of why that term is used in particular. And consideration for that, right, and kind of how we are attached to our screens and implications for really young people, right? I have a 3-year-old son, so I have to think about that, right? The screen time aspect of it and all those things. And then also just, concerns and questions around, well, are they putting in their best effort? Are they really thinking critically and putting forth, their best work? Or are we becoming too reliant on this tool to where it becomes kind of somewhat of a crutch? So I think that there's those things, but then related to kind of the data aspect as well is just thinking about, if these platforms, if these tools, resources are free, even if they are only storing your data for a certain period of time, I am someone who is of the mind and thinking now that if you can't pinpoint the product, you are the product. And that's kind of where my question comes in when it comes to data privacy, efficiency, and just what's going on, especially with a lot of things, just popping up out of nowhere. There's so many platforms. Yeah, it can be scary, I think, for a lot of folks. And I think for us who are learning more about it, it kind of becomes our responsibility to kind of learn as much as we can so that we can share as transparently with other people as possible.
Wonderful. Thank you. This next question kind of relates to what you were saying, Cedric, about teacher adoption, so to speak, and the over-reliance of using AI. But what role does teacher training and professional development play in AI integration? Because I feel like we've all been in the classroom space, and we all know those teachers who just refuse to change. So what role how do we navigate that space in education?
Professional development is huge. There's educators making just unbelievable, huge errors with AI because of lack of knowledge. For example, the famous case by now of the Texas A&M professor who took all of his students' papers and gave to ChatGPT and said, "Did you write this?" "Well, yeah, I wrote it." He failed over half of his class, and they didn't even use AI for their assignments. So there's been national stories about this guy, and it's really embarrassing. And there are so many people that I hear about doing that with ChatGPT, and that is never, ever reliable in any way. And they just don't know that. So that's where the professional development would come in. And I think there needs to be professional development regarding AI detectors, which is a kind of a sore spot for me anyways. But in addition to that, just how do you use it best? How do you do the prompting correctly? How do you get the output you want? What are the best case uses, and if there even is a best case use developed, because it's so new. But yeah, there needs to be a lot of education for teachers because there's so many misconceptions. In these 3 recent keynote speeches I gave, one of the questions I asked every group, the largest group was 800 professors. And I said, how many of you raise your hand if you use ChatGPT 7 days a week? No hands went up. 6, 5, couple hands went up. 3, I got down to who has never used ChatGPT? 80% of the professors raised their hand. And that was the same thing at all the colleges I spoke at. So I was really shocked. It's like ChatGPT and generative AI is going to change the entire structure of education, and you've never used it. And so I immediately gave them an assignment, which is you need to go sign up for a free account and you need to start messing around with it, because it's going to change how you do your career and how your students learn. So that's where the professional development comes in as well.
Yeah, I think Tim touches on a very important aspect. People fear change. They fear that AI is going to take over, like Cedric mentioned. And the best thing in preparing people for that is to train them, to show them, get them involved in the process. Because if you start getting people involved in the process, showing them how it works, what the possibilities for them personally are, to get that personal buy-in, then you open windows for everybody. It's that whole thing about the unknown, that psychological play of the unknown and how's it going to impact me. So we tend to do the ostrich in the sand approach, ignoring the whole thing rather than jumping in and exploring and approaching it. So I think that personal buy-in, equipping the educators, trainers, that is so important to show them it's not a scary change, but the possibilities are endless for you personally to grow as well.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you. I know decades ago when learning styles and learning preferences came about, it changed the game for sure. But now that AI is here, how can AI tools be customized to suit those diverse learning styles and abilities of various students?
I think with the use of generative AI, there's going to be a lot more platforms built that will actually take a look at how is the student's performance on an exam, or how's their performance on a worksheet. And it can then take that information and model the next questions and the next learning directives so that every student in the classroom will have the same learning outcome, but they will have a different path to get there. And I think that's a powerful usage of generative AI that I don't think it's been exploited to the degree that it's going to be in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it becomes a question of adaptation. And I know that, differentiation is a always kind of at the forefront for a lot of teachers. How do I make sure that all of my students in this class, you might have a room full of 30 students at whatever level, and, they're all, the capabilities are different, right? Like for example, I can use myself, being a third grade math teacher, I had students who were at fourth or fifth grade level in terms of mathematics. I had students who were at a first grade level, and you had some who were basically just kind of like in the middle. And the idea of that is, well, I have to try to reach everyone. And which to me, what ultimately ends up happening, sadly, is that the students who are in the middle, who are just kind of trailing along, I think that they kind of get overlooked pretty often. So there could be questions and considerations around, well, how can we leverage the AI tools? And maybe this goes back into the professional learning aspect of things, to be able to think of a new way, or different strategies and approaches that might still even leverage the learning modalities as we understand them right now, but just other creative aspects that we can employ into our classrooms, or even in the homeschool sector, because I support very much so with a lot of homeschoolers, and a lot of questions there around learning and how do we adapt and how do we adjust things, because a lot of parents who are home with their children and teaching them are not necessarily formal educators. So the idea of this concept of pedagogy and how do I adapt this and move things around and shift it so that my child understands this math problem, or, is able to kind of keep pace and track with their reading, to be able to kind of use these types of tools to even just generate ideas that have been proven to work, right? Research-based types of instructional practices are, I think that right there is kind of like at the forefront. And then you get to a point where you say, well, what else can this do? What else can this produce? And then from that point, for folks who are creating platforms and resources and things, kind of like what Tim was mentioning, how can we then harness that and then produce and create the things that we're seeing that are going to actually solve the problems which would, ultimately support our students, our children, our whoever, right, at any point, with whatever it is that they're doing. So I think that starting kind of at that base level of, well, let's see what it gives us. And then from there, being able to leverage and say, let's see what we can use it to produce and create on the back end, to drive things further is, I think, kind of where my mind ultimately goes for that question.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You mentioned homeschool, and it drew me to one of the other questions that was prompted here. It's, what are the cultural and institutional barriers that may hinder AI implementation in educational institutions? What do you think those barriers could be?
I think the number one barrier is the teacher or professor themselves, because their fear of it, their fear to change, is a huge barrier to overcome, to the point where they're not even willing to touch it yet. And a lot of teachers complain. They say, everyone says that we need to embrace AI. We need to change our assignments. How? What do I do? How do I change my assignment? And until they have those answers through professional development or through different learning sources, I think there'll be very resistance to the change. And I see that as a very big barrier.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Thank you. Jumping back into the learning abilities and everything, how can AI be utilized to foster creativity, which is obviously necessary in an educational space? How can AI be utilized, or is there a barrier with AI and creating or fostering creativity?
This one actually really intrigues me because, well, first, some of my favorite music right now is actually AI generated. And I literally, before I got on this call, somebody sent me a message, a good friend of mine who's really deep into AI and Web3 himself. And he sent me a message that's had like an article attached to it. And there's one song that I've been listening to pretty frequently. Actually, there's albums out now, but there are songs from some of the most popular artists in the world right now. And I don't want to name drop or anything like that, but he sent me an article related to that basically stated that one of those songs could potentially be up for a Grammy. So I think that there's a question around that aspect of it, because, of course, there's somebody behind the creation of that song, as like a ghostwriter, and then someone who, can maneuver and manipulate AI to produce a great song, because I've heard it. And so you have that idea, but I think even building on that, just the prompting of some of the generative tools to come up with ideas and concepts, or beginning with your own idea or concept and having it build on that, is, I think, immense in terms of potential, because you can say, hey, I want to, create an organization that helps teachers, right? And start with a very simple prompt. And, from that point, you can just, the world is kind of your oyster. And then I think that there are also still, though, some potential hiccups that could go along with the detrimental use of that creativity. One case being, I forget how recent this was, maybe back in May, there was actually a deep fake image that was released on the internet that dropped the US stock market, because it was an image of, again, deep fake, not real, an image of a plane crash near the Pentagon. And you saw the US stock market drop, and then it rebounded after they realized what happened. I mean, for somebody to produce some type of thing like that, I mean, it takes kind of a creative mind. But I think that ultimately the question then becomes, what happens to the artist? What happens to the person who, creates these types of, pieces of work? And, does the creative writing? What happens to them when, someone who has a kind of, I guess I'm gonna say, simple idea, but has the access and has the know-how, prompting wise, to produce a whole full-length novel, or whatever the case is, a piece of artwork, and then goes and sells it as if they are that same person who is scraping pennies, just painting because they love it and they're actually very talented in it. So I think that there's some disconnect there, which I think is a little scary, especially for artists and people in that space. But yeah, again, it could go kind of either way. But I mean, it's definitely there and open for creativity.
Mm-hmm.
I think Cedric touches. Oh, sorry, Tim.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think Cedric touches on an important thing. I listened to a talk on copyright law in AI, and because it's developing so quickly, what belongs to the artist, what belongs to the institution, what belongs to the teacher, and what is, common property. There are no laws or a solid structure of law currently to accommodate that. But I think, coming back to fostering creativity and critical thinking in students, especially thinking where augmented reality and virtual reality is going, not to mention the platforms where you can create images, but just immersing users into those platforms, immersing them in situations. I think those experiences challenges students and people to think critically and creatively to get out of that. If you think about the escape room concept, where you have to get clues and gather information and that sort of thing, that is what AI can do for you. It can foster that critical thinking, that problem solving, to kind of think for yourself and not just follow the lead, where you might have fallen in that trap in the traditional classroom of just consuming information, but turning it from consumption into thinking and creating. And I think that is how AI can, change how our brain works and how we think about life in general and how we approach problems.
Thank you.
I'll share an example as for creativity. When I was preparing my talks, I created a history assignment as an example. So for the assignment, the student selects a list of, say, 10 historical events. What do they want to talk about for their assignment? Then their first step is using an image generator such as Midjourney. Let's say my example was American Revolution. So I generated an image of myself wearing American Revolutionary clothing out on the field. And then my next task was to go to generative AI tools such as ChatGPT and say, tell me about the day in my life as if I was in that time era, and also include some of the political events, some of the other things of that time frame. And so it told me step by step what my day was like. It says you up in the morning, your body hurt because you were sleeping on the ground. You had to go out and forage for your breakfast. And then it went on to talk about what's happening in the world at that time. And as I'm reading this, I'm not a history person, but I became so immersed because that is me. That is my day in the life in the American Revolution. So I'm reading it. Then in my mind, I had all these questions. So then I started prompting GPT with questions. I said, did they do this? What was the greatest invention of that time era? I started just wandering from the assignment, learning new things because of my curiosity. And then that became part of the assignment. After you read about your day in that life, ask 3 questions that you may be curious of. Then the next part of the assignment is use sources and citations to verify facts that it talks about. So now they're doing some research and they're making sure that it's not hallucinating, just feeding them a bunch of garbage. But I learned so much about the American Revolution. And the thing is, I was totally engaged. I was interested. If you tell me you need to write a report about the American Revolution, oh my gosh, horrible. I don't want to do it. But this assignment, I was excited to do. I thought it was really cool.
Thank you all for sharing those great examples of how AI can be utilized to foster creativity. And you mentioned a few things like copyright. And so I want to bring up the next question. What ethical considerations should be taken into account with AI adoption in education?
I can jump in. Yeah, I mean, I mentioned like the use case for music and basically replicating someone's voice. But I've also heard on the other side of that where, and that I've had this thought, but somebody mentioned to me that this was actually a thing, so I can't confirm it or say I have a source. But just the scary aspect of, well, what if someone was to use a family member's voice, right? To phone, give you a phone call or something like that. So for me, it's just those types of things. So I mean, I don't necessarily know how anyone producing or building a platform or employing the technology would be able to ensure that that's not going to happen. So I think that that's kind of one of the considerations, but definitely when I guess considering in schools in particular, and we'll kind of think about it maybe K-12, and even I guess in higher ed too. I mean, the one thing that a lot of those kind of systems have in place is they have some type of firewall, but a lot of times it's either just set up for things to either be allowed or just not at all. So with this, it's like, well, there's good aspects to it, but there's this thing that could happen. So the concern then becomes, well, can we use it at all, right? Can it be put in place? Or for me thinking, are there going to be platforms and systems that come up that focus primarily on the use case of AI, particularly for educational, settings, to where those types of ideas and, the potential of, something crazy happening, either on screen or, whatever the case is, privacy wise, where those things don't necessarily have to be so much of a concern, they can be mitigated. I know we're not necessarily seeing that just yet, but I know that especially for a lot of teachers, if you're really, teaching, anybody, that's a minor, there's a lot, of weight and a lot of, kind of things that could go wrong. And I know that for a lot of parents and families at home, the thought process is, well, we already have to deal with social media and making sure that my child doesn't, overindulge or experience the craziness that are on a lot of these platforms already. So what's the difference here with AI? And how can we ensure that our children are going to be safe? And I don't know that anybody has a really good answer for that, at least not right now.
Well, I think knowledge is power, and just touching what Cedric says, not only in schools and colleges, but I spoke to a client the other day and I asked them, what is your AI policy in the company? What is your ethical AI governance? I think it's so important to look at strict compliance to rules and data protection like GDPR. Does your system comply to that? There should be accountability and continuous monitoring of the system. Transparency, if you're talking about parents and schools, be transparent about what you do to protect their children's information, what you do to protect just what happens on there. Do you have restrictions on what can be accessed? Because it's not only what is provided, but do you open your platform to anything? So do you add those restrictions in there? And then, as we've mentioned earlier, Tim touched on it earlier, responsible procurement. When you're looking at AI solutions, prioritize your vendors. Where do they come from? What are their internal policies? How do they set up their restrictions and data protection and governance? So I think ethics is such a touchy subject, but it's such a crucial part of, that's where you start when considering what platform, what AI tools you're going to be implementing, because that is going to determine how safe the user is going to be at the end of the day.
And I'm sorry, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention one last thing. It slipped my mind when I was talking. I think just even the idea around potential bias of whoever is creating the tool and what that could mean for the end user. Right, like if I'm creating something and I'm programming or whatever the case may be, who knows what internally I'm going to have within that system that might come out in whatever way on the back end. And also just consideration for if we're talking about ethics and policy and things like that, validity of a lot of the information that's also being shared there too, right? And how the information and research is being disseminated on these platforms, and how we can actually prove that, because a lot of people are honestly, for ChatGPT, for using as the primary example because it's probably most popular, a lot of people are just kind of taking what it says and using it and just kind of running with it without verification of, well, is that actually fact? Because I've found personally that there have been instances where it has not told the truth. So you do have to fact check in a lot of instances, in a lot of cases. But I think that, going and looking at that, like, well, what's the long-term implications for that scenario where people kind of just take what the generative AI tells them as the gospel? Because it's like, oh, well, the technology told me, it must know, right? So at what point? Because that could then become a huge question of, is the information that is being provided, are the sources that are being pulled from, are those things ethical? And, then we can go down the whole rabbit hole of diversity, equity, inclusion, representation, which, is a whole nother thing, right? But that's just one of the things I had to mention, was just that aspect of it.
No, that's great. I'm going to give Tim a moment to address that.
One quick thing I'll add to add to what you're saying. If I say my dog ate what's it going to tell me? Say dog ate my homework. Is that true? Probably not. But probability of that word strung together would be homework, because ChatGPT and generative AI is not about facts. It's about probability of what is the next word. So that's something that all users have to be very careful of. And as Cedric mentioned, fact check everything, because it's probability of words, not of facts.
That's good. Thank you for that. That's a huge component of AI adoption and consideration. It just reminds me of when I was growing up, Wikipedia was a huge thing, and that's what we'd all go to try and find our research papers. And no, we know now that was a bad idea. So definitely gotta do your fact checked and do your homework. So thank you for that. I appreciate that, because that's not something that I truly considered before. And I'm sure a lot of people, it's not the first thing that they think of with AI adoption. So with that, my next question is open to all of you, is what measures can be taken to ensure that AI, specifically in education, is continually evolving to meet the changing needs of learners and educators? What can we do to make sure that it's staying up to date and relevant and accurate?
I think with all of and just recently, ChatGPT now gives the API users the ability to fine-tune version 3.5, which is really big, because a fine-tuned 3.5 can outperform ChatGPT 4 for certain things. So with that ability, educators and programmers can now fine-tune the GPT models to really take whatever role we want it to. We can give it information that we want to have access to. We have, let's say, for example, we have proprietary information that's not out on the internet. We could train GPT with that information so that when our students interact with it, with our model, they're going to get that type of a feedback and those types of answers. So based on that ability, it will always evolve and always change as we do and as the users do.
Yeah, I think, Tim, the critical word you used there was evolve and the user. I think creating a culture of innovation, a culture of learning, a culture of experimentation, if you cultivate a culture within your educators, your trainers, your teachers, that will kind of guide them and make them curious about what's going on, because it's so easy to fall in that trap of, I have this tool, I know this tool, I stick with this tool, so you have to kind of get past that barrier of that comfort zone and get people excited to explore further than what they just currently have, and see, is there new adaptations? Are there new ways that I can use, I can evolve with AI to grow my user experience, to grow my class, to grow, myself individually. Because when we're invested in ourselves, again, I want to iterate that, when we're invested in ourselves, in our self-growth, then it's a lot easier to get that buy-in and to kind of push that forward and help other people grow as well. So yeah, culture is a crucial key in helping people evolve and grow with the technology and information.
And I just want to add one thing related to both of those points, I think, which are awesome, is, I mean, simply put, I think that whoever's producing the resource, producing the platform, the best thing that they can potentially do for, we'll say, teachers in this case and students is listen. I mean, I think it's pretty plain to say, like, if you want to serve or service anyone, then you probably should listen to that particular person or group, right? Like, if I'm gonna, try to sell, a workout plan, I can't necessarily just say, well, I'm just gonna put this out here and, I know it fits the needs of the people out there. No, I mean, you have to actually go and say, what are your concerns? What do you need? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, with any of this, I would say and hope that the primary goal is to solve problems, right? To create solutions. If you don't know what the problems are, how can you provide a solution, right? That's like trying to do a mathematics question, problem that you don't even know what the question is, right? You're just providing answers. 42. Well, where'd that come from? What's the point, right? It doesn't make any sense. So I think you have to have, again, if you're talking about the whole cultural aspect of it, there has to be inclusiveness of whoever it is that you're trying to bring in, which means that you have to listen to the voices of the teachers. What are your concerns? What are your issues? And then also just testing wise, right? Do we have actually not just implementing after purchase or anything like that, but in the development stages, are we actually bringing in the people who are going to be kind of boots on the ground with the tools and technology to say, this is great or not, which is why for me, one of the things that I do in support of educators is, if folks are looking for additional, sources of income, or people are looking to pivot, because I know transitioning teachers is it's a whole vibe right now. But, one of the aspects that I say to teachers is, well, you have a lot of value and leverage to a lot of these special education technology companies, because they're ultimately going to try to get you, the teacher, to use this. So if you're internal, right, or you're basically there while the thing is happening and being built and created, your input is extremely valuable, because a lot of the folks, and not in somebody like Tim's case, who's actually, in the space, but a lot of folks who are developing and producing and creating a lot of the technologies either haven't been in the classroom in a long time, if ever, outside of them being a student, or they're just kind of far removed from it. So I think getting the most up-to-date types of things that are happening within the classrooms, especially when we're talking about students, what are the barriers to learning and entry in terms of information? And if we're going to try to solve those problems, then that's where you have to actually start to listen, because then you can produce the solutions based off of what you've heard actually in the world that you're trying to service.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you so much for those comments. I now want to open up, because I know we're winding down on time. I want to open it up and give you guys the opportunity for a few closing remarks on how we can really address the barriers in AI adoption in education. And I'll go ahead and Wilmari, you can take a moment to think and collect your thoughts. But Wilmari, I'll give it to you to kick us off on those closing remarks.
I think the biggest thing, when approaching a project and looking at, coming from a corporate point of view, always think, what do you want to achieve with AI? What do you want to get out of this? Because it's very daunting, and especially, thinking about socioeconomic circumstances in our country, costing is it's difficult, because everybody wants to jump in and get the full package and hit the full ground running, but it's not always possible. We have to take in consideration, and there are, as Tim mentioned, there are some great free tools available on, that people can use that are being developed. But again, take that time, be accountable, be responsible for what you put out there. But the key thing that I want to say, in addressing the barriers and overcoming those barriers is keep your focus of what you want to achieve, and then work backwards from that and see what is available to achieve those goals. What can you currently afford, and how can you grow within AI, and how can you grow your system so that, it's not just a lot of data dumping basically on your user as well, but that you as a school, that the pupil, that the user, that they grow with you, become comfortable with you, and then you approach it phase by phase so that it's not so overwhelming for you, especially if you want to take in consideration personal development, training of your trainers. Where are they? Listen to them. What are their needs? And then build up from that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Wilmari. We'll go ahead with Tim.
Maybe not exactly your question, but I just feel it's really important that I bring this up. And that's the strategy that a lot of teachers have, that they're going to use detection to stop their students from using AI. And I would like to point out that the company that created ChatGPT is called OpenAI. OpenAI made an AI detector that they had in their website. Recently, they removed it, and they stated the reason is it's not reliable to detect AI writing. They stated they had 26% accuracy in their detection. You can take Claude 2, which came out in July. You can take and write an entire 2,000-word paper and run it through AI detectors, and the AI detectors will say 0% AI. 10 out of 10 times you can do that. And you can use ChatGPT and run it through a rephraser, and it will be undetected as well. So detecting AI is not a solution. Now, I'm talking about not detecting it. What's even worse is the false positives, where you accuse a student of using AI that didn't. What are the repercussions of that? How does that student feel? How does that affect their future education? How much effort are they going to put in if they're being falsely accused of cheating when they really didn't? So detection, and I know a lot of people, teachers, faculty, that are using detection as their sole approach to AI, which I think is a huge, huge mistake. There's much better approaches and much better ways of dealing with it, because that is not a solution.
Awesome. Thank you for that. That is definitely a barrier to consider, the detection component of AI. We appreciate that. Cedric, you want to close us out with your remarks?
Sure. Yeah, I kind of want to go at it from the mindset kind of perspective. First and foremost, and I don't want this to frighten anybody. I just personally don't believe, I don't have any proof of this, that it's not, I just don't think it's going anywhere. I'm gonna be honest with you. But I also want people to take that and not really become kind of frightened by it. And I'll just give a couple of quick examples. We have automated teller machines, right? Your ATMs. I don't know about anybody else, but when I go into a grocery store or, any type of store, really a drugstore, what have you, there's tends to be automated checkout. So we've become comfortable with certain aspects of this thing. And it feels like the big bad wolf sometimes. But what I want to really kind of hone in on is that we can extract, helpful, beneficial use cases for a lot of the AI tools as they come out. And I just preface that by saying, because these things aren't necessarily going away, right? And we see that it's moving really fast, which can be kind of daunting for a lot of folks. I'm, being a mathematics person, I came up with an equation, not necessarily just related to AI, but just in general, is that exposure plus experience equals education. I would really just encourage everyone to at least get some type of exposure to it. Because honestly, at this point, you've had exposure to artificial intelligence. Again, the examples I just gave, but in this context, give yourself a chance to just even take a look at it. If you know somebody who is, kind of rubbing elbows in the space, say, hey, I want to check this out. Can you show me? Because it becomes a lot less of like this monster and beast. Once you begin to get into it, it actually kind of becomes kind of interesting and fun sometimes. But again, the exposure aspect of it is important. But then personally, I don't necessarily feel that you can get to the point of being educated and really having an awareness of something unless you've actually engaged directly with it yourself, which to me is the experience part of that equation. So allow yourself to have the exposure. And then, our children, my son being 3 years old, he's going to be exposed to a lot of things. This is one of them. But as a father, as an educator, it is definitely my responsibility to at least have some know-how to be able to provide, at least minimal guidance on how we can go about this the right way. So again, exposure, at least, dip your feet in, check it out, experience, type in a couple of things, see what it gives you. And that leads to, ultimately becoming a little more educated and aware of what's happening so that, if and when things do occur, you're not just left in the dark, which is really what I don't want for anybody in this situation.
Oh, I completely agree. Thank you.
That's definitely golden advice. And I'll also add that there have been numerous surveys done with thousands of hiring managers, and 87%, 93% all state future job skills will require ChatGPT experience. So if we don't expose our students to that, they're not going to be prepared for future job markets. Just because you aren't prepared for it doesn't mean that they shouldn't be. So as Cedric said, you have to get your hands on it, start using it, and allow your students to be exposed to it, because they will have to have that experience in the future.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you all so much. This has been a really great discussion talking about AI barriers in education. And we touched on a lot of different points that are relevant in this discussion. And so hopefully whomever is watching this can learn a few things and can take it back to their organizations, their school systems, and be able to truly overcome those barriers that AI presents in an educational system. So with that, this will conclude the fourth panel talking about AI barriers. Thank you so much for the panelists. You guys have been amazing. So thank you. I appreciate it. Nabil, Wasif, I'm not sure who takes over from here, but I think we're good to go.